In a crowded municipal courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation as proceedings for a high-profitable misconduct trial were underway. The judge's bench loomed over a sea of spectators and media cameras, capturing every moment of what many expected to be a routine reckoning for a group of notorious officers. Among those on trial were officers Ronald Hayes and Stephen Burke, long celebrated in some circles for their heavy-handed tactics and unchecked arrogance. Their smug expressions and confident demeanors had long masked a litany of corrupt practices that had flown under the radar until now. As the trial began, the prosecution laid out a series of damning testimonies and internal records, documenting years of excessive force, falsified reports, and covert misconduct. Yet, in a stunning display of arrogance, Hayes and Burke exchanged conspiratorial grins, whispering that the trial was merely a formality. Their smug laughter even spilled over into the courtroom corridors, as they celebrated their perceived invincibility with a cocktail of bravado and disdain for those who dared to question their authority. The defense, however, had a secret weapon that no one in the courtroom had anticipated. Sitting at the defendant's table was a dignified and poised woman named Simone Dupree, her presence commanding immediate attention despite her unassuming appearance. Dressed in a sharply tailored suit, Simone's calm exterior concealed a wealth of experience in internal affairs and law enforcement reform. Few realized that behind the quiet resolve in her eyes lay decades of investigative work that had ultimately led her to dismantle the corrupt structures within the department. Today, as the trial reached its climax, the courtroom was about to witness an extraordinary twist of fate. Midway through the proceedings, as the defense cross-examined a disgruntled former colleague of the officers, Simone's legal team presented a startling piece of evidence. A series of classified internal memos and disciplinary records had been submitted, documents that painted an irrefutable picture of systemic abuse. In a hushed yet resolute tone, Simone began to speak. The very officers you laud as pillars of our law enforcement system have, for years, engaged in practices that undermine public trust and tarnish our mission to serve. Her words, measured and precise, echoed throughout the courtroom, drawing a collective gasp from the audience. At first, the corrupt officers continued to exchange mocking looks, confident that their long careers and connections would shield them from any real consequence. They chuckled among themselves, seemingly oblivious to the implications of the evidence before them. That is, until a dramatic revelation shifted the balance of power entirely. In a moment that felt almost cinematic, the courtroom doors swung open with a measured authority. Walking in with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen through the layers of institutional decay was Captain Denise Marshall, a figure revered for her steadfast commitment to justice and reform. What no one anticipated was that Captain Marshall was, in fact, the newly appointed head of the entire department. Her promotion, the result of a secretive but rigorous internal review, had been kept under wraps until the moment was ripe. Captain Marshall's presence froze the corrupt officers in their tracks. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room as she approached the defendant's table. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced in a clear, commanding voice that brooked no opposition, "effective immediately, I am assuming command of this department." The words resonated like a gavel striking the floor, decisive and transformative. The shock in the courtroom was palpable. The officers who had just moments ago celebrated their supposed immunity now stood dumbfounded, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning terror. Captain Marshall continued, "It is my duty to ensure accountability and to restore the integrity of our institution. The evidence you have witnessed today will not be swept under the rug, and those responsible for violating the trust of the people will face the full weight of the law." Her proclamation turned the courtroom into a theater of profound change. The corrupt officers, once so brazen in their misconduct, were now exposed as the villains of a story that had just taken an unexpected turn. Their smug expressions dissolved into anxious glances, and the laughter that had earlier echoed in the corridors was replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Even the judge, who had prided himself on an impartial administration of justice, paused in astonishment at the unfolding drama. In the ensuing minutes, Captain Marshall outlined her vision for reform, a comprehensive strategy that would include not only punitive measures against those who had engaged in misconduct, but also sweeping changes in policy, training, and community engagement. "We will rebuild this department from the ground up," she declared, "and every officer, regardless of rank, will be held to the highest standards of professionalism and respect for human rights." Outside the courtroom, news cameras captured every moment of the dramatic power shift. Headlines the following day read, "New Boss, New Era, Captain Marshall Takes Command." Social media erupted with praise for the bold move, and communities across the city expressed a renewed hope that accountability would finally prevail in law enforcement. For the corrupt officers, the revelation was a crushing blow. Their once unassailable reputations lay in tatters, and many struggled to reconcile the reality of being overthrown by someone they had underestimated. Officer Hayes, who had spent years cultivating an image of invincibility, now found himself facing internal inquiries and the prospect of severe disciplinary action. Officer Burke, whose once carefree smirk had turned to grim resignation, could only watch as the new leadership dismantled the very networks of favoritism and corruption that had once shielded him. As the trial concluded and the courtroom began to empty, Captain Marshall took a moment to address the gathered media. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "We will no longer tolerate a culture that condones abuse of power. Every member of our department will be expected to uphold the values of justice, integrity, and service. I am here to lead that change, and I will not rest until every corner of this institution reflects the respect and accountability that the people deserve." Her words, broadcast on every major news outlet, sent ripples of hope through the community. For many citizens, the revelation that a courageous, principled leader now headed the police department was a sign that the era of unchecked corruption was coming to an end. In the days and weeks that followed, the transformation of the department became the subject of numerous discussions and analyses. Community forums were held, where residents shared their experiences and aspirations for a more transparent and accountable law enforcement system. Officers underwent extensive retraining sessions that emphasized cultural sensitivity and ethical conduct, and a new oversight committee comprising community leaders and civilian experts was established to ensure that reform was more than just rhetoric. For Captain Marshall, the journey ahead was daunting, yet invigorating. She knew that dismantling a deeply entrenched culture of corruption would not be easy, but she was resolute. Every step she took, every policy she enacted, was driven by a desire to rebuild trust, not only between the police and the community, but also within the hearts of those who had once abused their power. Thus, the day that began with corrupt officers celebrating their presumed invulnerability ended with a dramatic turnaround that redefined the future of law enforcement in the city. Captain Denise Marshall's ascension was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a rallying cry for change, a powerful reminder that true leadership is measured not by the power one wields, but by the courage to stand up for justice and reform. And as the echoes of that historic moment reverberated through the halls of the courthouse and beyond, one thing was abundantly clear. A new era had dawned, one where accountability, integrity, and respect would forever guide the path forward.